Now, I would like to talk about your movies.
Sure.
Uh, in your documentaries, you focus on mental health problems called schizophrenia and psychosis. As a
Yeah.
therapist, you also have worked with people who have such problems.
Yeah.
And there's this big nature versus nurture debate. But would you say that even such severe conditions like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder are pretty much symptoms of one's traumatic experiences?
Yes.
Is it genetics still?
No.
What's your take on this whole nature versus nurture debate?
Yes to nature, no to nurture. I mean, sorry, other way around. Sorry, I got it wrong.
Yeah, I
Uh,
got you.
no to nature, yes to nurture. I mean, anyone has the capacity to lose their mind, and I mean, I don't believe that this thing called schizophrenia is actually a thing. It's not a definable thing. It's just a conglomeration of so-called medical symptoms that get a label called schizophrenia, or something that gets a label as so-called bipolar. But those words to me don't specifically mean anything. What I think it's much more reasonable to say someone is in an extreme state, and what caused this extreme state? Tons and tons of upwelling, unresolved trauma from very early life that's been triggered by something in the modern life. And things like lifestyle definitely contribute to it, but the basic thing that causes it is extreme unresolved childhood trauma. And the things that get labeled as schizophrenia, in my experience from observing a lot of people and knowing a lot of people who've had that label and intimately knowing them and hearing their experiences and walking with them through their lives, is that it's really extreme stuff that causes that. It's not mild stuff. And and so it's like a lot of like really super horrendous stuff. I mean, now could I lose my mind, go absolutely nuts, and end up with that label of schizophrenia? I think yes, it would be possible, but I think it would have to be pretty extreme adult stuff to cause that. I think with people who have much more extreme childhood trauma, it can be much milder things that set it off in adulthood. And um, but the idea of it being biological, I mean, that's just a farce. They're always looking for excuses for what it's going to be. Oh, it's genetics, but find me some real genetic proof. Even the geneticists, they're always saying, well, we think we've almost got it, but they never get it. And it always makes the headlines. Well, we think we know what it is. We haven't defined it 100%, but we think this kind of gene turns it on and off. And it's always a bunch of silliness, and it's very distorted science from all I've read. And then when they get into the twin studies, and the really good identical twin studies, it's like there's really not that kind of concordance. Especially, it's like the twin studies are really very flawed. So it's like, anyone who wants to read about the real good nature versus nurture stuff, I would suggest for reading about the nature stuff, look up the work of J. Joseph. He's a psychologist in Oakland, California. He's written some of the best books on debunking all this genetic myth for so-called mental illness. Brilliant guy, great books, really insightful, really gets the genetics well, and it's like, it's very helpful. Though to me, I mean, I've read the stuff, but for me, I figured that out long ago anyways. It's like, I didn't need to get into all the genetics to understand that this is a bunch of crap. It's like it's extremely traumatized people who are having upwelling traumas in adulthood, and that gets labeled with all these funky names like schizophrenia and bipolar and schizoaffective and psychosis and all that.
Yeah, and also many mental health professionals say that if one is diagnosed with schizophrenia or psychosis, they have to take medication for the rest of their lives and they will be sick for the rest of their lives. Could you tell us a little bit about what positive effects you have documented in your movies and
Sure.
why so many mental health professionals are pretty much wrong?
Well, to answer the first part, or the second part, why are they so wrong, is when they say you need to take medications and you're going to have this disorder for the rest of your life. What it really means is they have absolutely no clue what else to do. They have no idea how to help people resolve their traumas. They don't understand really what's going on at all. And all they know how to do is give people pills that dope them up and make them into zombies so that they're more manageable. They're easier for society to deal with. They're easier for therapists to deal with. And they buy into all this genetic stuff because then they don't have to get into all the traumas and what this stuff really means. And how convenient for people who are therapists who have never really dealt with much of their own traumas. They can't, and because it's also very, very stressful to be around with people who are having tons of upwelling traumas, because it triggers one's own traumas. So it's for people who haven't dealt with a lot of their own inner world, it can be very threatening to work with people who are in these extremely altered, extreme states that get labeled schizophrenia, bipolar, mania, psychosis, things like that. So the other part of your question is what have I documented or made my movies around is, well, first is my experience as a therapist, watching people in extreme states come out of it sometimes without the pills. And more often than not, do people really come out of it when they're on the pills? Sometimes people seem to get their minds back a little bit, but then they become pill dependent. And getting off the pills is extremely, extremely hellish for a lot of people, if not for some people, just downright, given their circumstances, impossible. They just have it's just too difficult for a lot of people. Not necessarily impossible for anyone given certain environmental circumstances, but very, very difficult. So what have I documented? Well, I made this film called Open Dialogue about the Open Dialogue project in Finland, which right now statistically is getting the best results in the world for helping people who are in first episode psychosis, the stuff that it goes on, if it goes on for a few months, gets labeled as schizophrenia. They do intensive family therapy, helping people work out what's going on in their relationships with their family members. They meet with them very, very early on in their problems. They don't wait 1 or 2 years until the person's becoming like so embedded with their problem that they've gotten super stuck. They're getting people pretty much at the beginning when their first psychotic stuff is flaring up. And super intensive family therapy, meeting with them every day, not putting them in the hospital, if at all possible, not putting them on pills. I think it's like something like 2 out of 3 people never got on any antipsychotics at all. Another big thing they do is try to help them regulate their sleep-wake cycles. So a lot of people who are going through all this extreme trauma are in overwhelming anxiety and they don't sleep well. Duh, it's kind of obvious because they're so overwhelmed and anxious. And then what happens is if they don't sleep well, or if they don't sleep at all for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, or a week, or 2 weeks, then anybody's going to go nuts. So whatever problems they're already going through are just totally amplified by lack of sleep. So a lot of people, once they help them sleep, and sometimes they do it with sleeping pills, which they give short term, but basically it's like get that person to sleep quick, give them sleeping pills for 2 or 3 days. You can get people who have really lost their minds profoundly and are really out there with just a couple of days of sleep. They can really come back to themselves. They don't need antipsychotics. And then if they've been given sleeping pills like benzos, like Valium and stuff like that, short term, for just a few days, they don't get addicted to it because these drugs are extremely addictive. And when people start taking those for months or years, it's like absolute hell to get off those benzos. If they give them very short term, it's not difficult to get off the drugs. They get off of them, and often that can be enough to start getting them back into sleep at night, be awake during the day, sleep at night, being awake during the day. And then for some people, that can be enough to yank them out of their psychotic state and give them enough insight to be able to work through whatever they're going through. Whatever they're going through interactionally. But then it's another thing is to help them see what is it that they've been going through in their lives. What is it going on in their social networks and with their family members that's been going on to elicit all this stuff in them. And a lot of times for a lot of people, that's enough to help people pull through and basically to work through whatever it is they're going through and not to be so-called psychotic anymore. And that's where their results right now are something like 85% of people with first episode psychosis in this whole catchment area of northern Finland are pulling through their psychosis. That's one example. And then, but they're a place that part of what makes them special is not just the work that they do, but the fact that they're quantifying it with actual data. A lot of other places that I visit get very good results, some perhaps even better than this place, this Open Dialogue place in northern Finland, but they just don't sit around quantifying their results as specifically according to like DSM diagnostic criteria. So, but there's a lot of places that get good results. And also, when I travel, I constantly am meeting people who have been labeled with schizophrenia, who have never taken meds or who have gotten off their meds and who are not psychotic at all anymore and really have a grip on what happened to them, why this happened to them, and have made sense of their lives. And those people are all over the place. And then when I travel and screen my films, like last week I was in Massachusetts for a week, I met many people who were diagnosed with extreme stuff, who aren't on meds, who are living, it could sound rude, some people don't like the word, but living very functional lives, basically. Doing what they do, going to school, working, not out there, not in extreme states, and have understood why whatever happened to them happened and didn't get into the I need to take my medication for life, I am schizophrenic, I am bipolar. They didn't buy into that medical model mishmash that I actually find to be very sad and incorrect.